That's right.
And she is the story. But, I mean, she's in trouble.
That's right.
She is in trouble.
Yeah.
And she needs help.
That's right. I mean, think about it. If we only part of the Bible we ever read was Revelations. Yeah. And so we know what the end of the story is. But the problem is, how do each and every one of us prepare ourselves to be part of that end of the story? I'm not a reader, I'm a studier, but for those of you who are readers, do you ever just get a book and just go right to the last chapter and read that and then forget about the rest of the book? I mean, there's people who will sit down and not get up again until they've read the entire book. But if we just read the last chapter and don't read all the chapters leading up to the finale or the final outcome, we're never going to prepare ourselves so we can become part of that chapter. Everybody's out there taking the book of Revelations and trying to study the book of Revelations, trying to figure out when the end time is, when they should be studying the Bible to find out how they can be prepared to be part of that end time. So, I mean, that's how you have to look at all of the Bible. As you study the Bible, apply it to our lives each and every day. Let's go on to verse 3. Then the king said unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee to half of the kingdom. Now the king recognizes how uncomfortable the queen has to be, how terrified or how fearful this individual has to be. And in our terms today, basically what he's offered her to make her feel more at ease is a blank check. That's something we can understand. Queen Esther, here's your blank check. I will give you just fill in the amount, anything to make you he's trying to put her at ease. Now, what do we know about this king beforehand? Does it sound like this is the same king that we know about how ruthless he was? Does it sound like the same person? Or do you think God had anything to do with working in the heart of this king to soften his heart towards Esther? Of course. This is a coincidence. By chance, all of this happened. Oh, I'm sorry. But some people would read it as that. That's one of our human traits. Okay? But in this case, the heart of a ruthless king had been softened towards his new queen to the point where he was going to do anything possible to put her at ease, and he did so by offering her basically a blank check. I'm going to give you everything up to half of the kingdom, just, basically just to make you feel better.
Has she been picked as queen up to now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They call her Queen Esther.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole process basically in the mind of the king is done. It's over. Okay. Let's go on to verse 4. And Esther answered, If it seemed good unto the king. Now just keep that in mind, just that little phrase. If it seemed good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. How could she word that differently and possibly get a totally different result?
She's already offered her half the kingdom, so she could have just turned around and said, what I want from you is, as you've offered me half the kingdom is, I want you to come to the banquet and you better bring Haman with you.
Exactly right. As a classroom teacher, I remember there's certain ways you can get students to do things on your behalf. And this is an extreme example. This did not happen, but anyway. If I had a really disruptive class in front of me, I could start going to the students and say, I need you to shut up. Now, what kind of reaction does getting someone, if you tell them to shut up, what kind of reaction do you get back from someone when you tell them that?
They won't be louder.
Well, yeah, no, you're right. They're gonna go on the attack, probably. Again, this is high school. So they're going to go on the attack. So you could take that same situation, that same disruptive classroom, and do totally something different. Now, I had a lot of humor in the classroom. It was kind of my technique. Now, please stick with me on this. Don't lose the... I would actually walk around the classroom, and I'd have a stapler in my hand. So the class is a little louder than I want them to be. And so I'm just walking around with a stapler in my hand, and I'm just pressing the stapler. I didn't say a word. What kind of impression do you think they were, or what do you think the students were thinking about with me pressing the stapler and they were loud? What was I going to do with the stapler? Troy? They were laughing about it. Believe me, they were. They thought I was going to staple their lips shut. I didn't say a word. But that was because they knew me. They knew of my sense of humor. And so I would just, from that point on, I would never say a word. Instead of saying, shut up, which gives me a negative reaction back, I just walked around with a stapler. And eventually the class, slowly but surely, would quiet down and we would continue on with the lesson. So just as Esther did here, there's a couple ways that she could have presented what she wanted to the king, but she would have gotten possibly 2 different results. And through God's guidance, and possibly from the guidance of other people who were were dealing with her, who were in the king's palace or something like that, could have given her some guidance as to what to do, what to say, and how to do things. She worded it in such a way. If it be your will, everything's up to you, king. If you want to do it, I would like you to come to a banquet. All right? Now, God is continuing to work. Who gets introduced now into our story? Haman. God's reaching out, and now we're moving into the next thing, which is also going, as we start talking about Haman, we're going to start talking about another human trait, one that we don't necessarily want to have, and that's pride. But God is beginning to work already by introducing Haman into this story. All right, let's continue on. And we're going to read verses 4 through 6 now in this next part. And Esther answered, if it seems good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? Or what do you want, basically? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Again, he's sensing that she's very uncomfortable, and he's still trying to repeat again to put her at ease that I'm going to give you that blank check. All you have to do is just simply share with me. Now, at this point, why do you think Esther still has not come out with her request? By the way, what was her? What's her end request? What was he trying to accomplish? What was going to happen to the Jews? They're all going to be wiped out, yeah. So this whole process that we're going through is to save the Jews. So why hasn't she at this point continued or hasn't basically shared her request with the king? We know how the king feels towards her. Why hasn't she done that yet? Wait, what page was that on, Troy? Who has to be included in the final outcome? Who is the one who was pushing for the Jews to be annihilated? And who just got introduced? Haman. So there was still some work to be done with Haman yet. That's why she really had, this is God's whole plan, completely laid out in advance, step by step by step. God may plan things starting way over here with the end result being way over there. We just have to be in line that God's plan is working towards an end goal. And that's what's happening here. Yeah. But even Haman had got him. But even Haman had gotten part of, if you think of God's plan, even God's plan of where Haman was in his position was all part of God's plan. He got advanced or promoted to the position of the right-hand man of the king by Mordecai revealing that the king was about to be assassinated. And by these two leaders, or basically the next in line to the king, were then killed. And Haman got advanced up to that position. That was all part of God's plan. That was all done by chance.
I've often thought of this as when Haman got the summons from the king to come quickly. With Haman, with his sense of pride, must have thought, "Oh, this is awesome. The king wants me, needs me right now."
Yeah.
You know, and Haman's just going straight at it, thinking, "This is all good. This is all falling into place."
It's all fueling the fire a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, his mindset at the time, I think, would have been, "This is really cool. Everything's really good."
Yeah. And that's part of God's plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Esther,
Set him up.
Esther in her humility was going to manifest something. But Haman in his pride was also going to manifest something.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you've got something here coming that's going to clash.
That's right. Yeah. You have pros and cons, or you have in education, you always do a lot of comparisons. And that's exactly what we have here, the comparison of the outcome of pride versus humility. And of course, the other trait that we always like to talk about, and that's chance, that everybody...
This also tells us that God's will always protect us from the devices of Satan.
Amen.
If we get into God's will, if we stay in God's will, then He will protect us from the devices of Satan.
Now, I think both Bob and Emery had mentioned in each of their lessons that you realize that God's name has never been brought up anywhere in any of these verses. Would you now agree that God is at work? Would you agree that God is throughout this entire story? Yeah. So would you agree that there is no human trait called chance or coincidence? That all these things that do happen part of God's plan in our lives? If you pray for something and all of a sudden something happens and you start using the word coincidence or chance, there's something wrong with us. How can you pray for something and when it happens you call it a coincidence, a chance? Before we went into that meeting, we sat out in the parking lot and prayed. And the first person we had contact with was a person who was part of that ministry at another church. Now, if we said that was by chance, we just happened to run into this student, we'd be crazy for thinking that way. There is no chance in our lives. Everything is laid out as a part of God's plan for each and every one of us that are sitting here this morning. We're running out of time, so...
Don't you think the Lord is doing this to allow us to see what's going on? Let them see too. Esther.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like Pastor says many times, he says, we see new faces coming through the door each and every Sunday. And every single person who comes through this door is equipped in a different way. And so what would you say, that's by chance that someone comes through the door? And they're equipped a different way. There might be a need here at Lakeside, and this person just happens to walk through the door and join the body? No, that's not coincidence. That's not chance. And
Why does people come to church? In the first place, why do strangers come to this church? Think about it. Why does
Well, I think non-believers come out of curiosity.
Yeah, but most of the time when you come to church, there's a need. You have some type of need.
Well, yeah, they've hit a low spot possibly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you got some, I don't care if it could be minute, but there is a need. Even if you see a new church set here, you know what? I need to go over and find out what they're about. It's a need.
Yeah.
They have a need. And when they come, this church's job is to feed the sheep. That's their job. Give them something that's their hunger that makes them come back.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, that's what grows a church. That's what he told Peter, feed my sheep.
Do you ever hear the phrase where you open your front door, but you have to make sure you close the back door?
Yeah. Well,
Do you know what that means?
the church is like a farm.
Well, you talk about a church. Visitors coming to your church, they come in which way? They come in from the front door. But what happens inside this building during the time that they're here has to be something that closes the back door, which is usually the way they go out. I mean, that's kind of an exaggeration, but that's a phrase you hear quite often used with churches is if you're opening your front door to welcome in the people, you should make sure that you close the back door to where there's something going on here. They're being spiritually fed. Not entertained, spiritually fed here at the church, and that's what keeps them here. And you're not going to have the back door swinging all the time with people leaving. Okay, let's continue on. We're running out of time here. Let's go down to verse 7 and 8. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king, there's that wording again, if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. This is almost exactly the same request or the same response that she gave once before. Whose benefit was this one for? We've already touched on it. Whose benefit? Who's being worked on? Haman. This is being done. This two-step process is being done for the benefit of Haman. All right? And just as Jonathan said, Haman is really being fed here. He has a prideful part to his personality, and every time that the queen is requesting that Haman be present, I mean, not only would it look bad if Haman wasn't there and he was the one, he would think if he was left out, there might be something in the works about me. But by being included, there he's being fed, and that what's being fed is his prideful spirit.
That's where God gives him a chance to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you always get a chance to change, to turn.
That's why we have the differences between humility and pride. If he changed, his chance or his opportunity would be to go from being a prideful spirit to being humble. That's right. And so you go through there and you have that situation. Now, as we get into the next verse, we're going to find out how God continues to work. And in your books, if you turn to page 129, we're going to look at verse 9. Now remember again, we just had the queen request Haman's presence twice. Just the king and Haman. And we get to verse 9. Then went Haman forth that day with a joyful and a glad heart. What kind of heart? Glad heart. He was just ripping with pride, boy. I'll tell you, it was oozing. It was oozing everywhere. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation as against Mordecai.
There's only one thing standing in front of his door.
That's right, Mordecai. And this is basically how this whole idea of wiping out all the Jews came about, was the prideful spirit of Haman. And so you have Haman's pride being pushed along by the requests of the queen, and all of a sudden, you have one individual that he happens to pass going through the king's gate, and it just takes that pride and just starts bringing it right down. If you ever watch the news nowadays, I'm not going to pick on professional sports, but I'm going to. You'll have situations where they'll talk about the signing of a certain position player on a certain team, and they'll say he is the highest paid player in the NFL. He is the highest paid player in the NBA or Major League Baseball or something like that. What has that got to do with their skill set? Absolutely nothing. But yet, what feeds into the pride of somebody? What are some of the things that we always boast about that are prideful? We talk about money or riches. We talk about our positions. We talk about the successes of our family. Yeah. And so what happens here, we have a situation now where the pride has become so great in this individual. I remember a professional baseball player that renegotiated their contract because they were no longer the highest paid player. The highest paid player. I have to say that twice. They renegotiated a contract. They had like a 4-year contract in place. After 2 years, they renegotiated it because they weren't the highest paid player any longer or the highest paid quarterback. Now, what makes them want to renegotiate to become the highest paid player? Pride. Has nothing to do with their successes or their how well they did on the field. It has everything to do with their pride and feeding their pride. But I'm not going to just pick on them. It's the same thing in our own lives. There's always a streak of pride going through all of us. Okay? Let's go on with verses 10 and 11. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends, underline friends, and his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches. Now listen, listen to watch this. He tells them of the glory of his riches, the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Every single thing that is a source or an area of prideful beliefs or feelings was covered by Haman. He hit all of them. In those verses, what's the only thing that Haman did right? He did one thing right. He refrained himself. That's the only thing he did right. Everything else. Why did he call his friends and his wife? With the exception of me. Why did he call his friends and his wife? Because what are his friends or wife going to do in the exception of me? They're going to pat him on the back. All they're going to do is continue to feed the pride. Great job, Jonathan. I love that shirt, by the way.
Don't you think he thought he could have more power with Esther by his wife? She'd be able to change Esther.
I never thought of that one. Yeah, so he... Yeah. So what... So he continues to surround himself with people that are just going to feed into pride. And as God is at work again, by chance and by coincidence, all these things are happening, right? Thank you. A couple people got it. All right, let's continue on. Let's go down to 13 and 14 and finish up the verse. Yet all of this availed me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting by the king's gate. And then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou and merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. All right, so his friends and his wife gave him all the information he wanted to have to feed into his pride, to feed into it. There's even, look at the size of the gallows. 75 feet high. So everybody could see him. Also, what was the size of Mordecai?
He was a little man.
By name alone, he was little. And so you have a little man that you're going to execute on the biggest gallows that you could ever find. So again, just as it is, everyone's going to see this and know who is the source of this particular penalty. Again, all of this.
It was ridicule. He wanted to ridicule him. Not only did
Oh,
he
yeah.
want to kill him, he wanted to absolutely ridicule him.
That's right. So as far as human traits go that we've seen in our lesson today, again, we see the humility of Esther. We see the pride of Haman. And we've discovered that there is no such thing as chance. In the place of the word chance, we replace it with what phrase? Who's at work? God's providence or God at work? Okay? Oh, yeah. Yeah. All instead of one. Yeah, that's exactly right. Anything else? So where does humility lead us? Humility leads us to the cross. Where does pride take us? Pride moves us away from the cross. Mordecai and Esther exercised courage, took risks, employed wisdom, and were thoroughly engaged in everything that was taking place at the time. That kind of applies to what we are dealing with and being engaged in what's taking place right now around us. So that was their time. We are now.
You look at what's happening here. The king who represents God, you can put him as a type of, the king who is uplifted. You can see him as God. You can see Esther as the church, the queen. And you can see Haman as the devil. Okay, so you can look at the picture of the church today. God loves his church. But the devil is doing everything he can to get us out of the will of God.
That's right.
I mean, he is trying everything in the world. If he can put you on that 50 cubic high gallows, he's going to put you on that gallows in order to stop the will of God.
Yep.
And that's what's happening today around it. Just look at what's happening on the news. I mean, look at what they're trying to do to Christianity. I mean, they're trying to snuff it out. But God is at work.
Was Esther afraid to the point where she didn't carry through with her responsibilities?
No, she was afraid, but she went through with it.
Was Mordecai show anywhere in any of the chapters so far any fear towards what he was doing and what God's will was for him? No. And they were both involved in what was going on at that time. Where today, just as Emery was saying, where today is the enemy working that we need to stand strong, not be fearful, and be just like Esther and Mordecai as far as our strength and courage? What's the focal point of the enemy's attacks today?
Compromise, in my opinion.
Okay? And the compromise is taking place where?
Yeah, he will.
Where is it really showing up a lot, the compromise?
Look at a number of churches in our area.
Look at the churches. The attacks are in the churches. They're starting with you and I. And so what happens is the enemy will divide families, the families being a foundation. then that family gets affected because that family is also part of a church family. The church family gets divided. Think, how many of you like the color of the carpet? Not everybody responded, so I think there's a division in this church already.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'm just saying, that's how petty things get, and all it takes is something as minor as that. Just if you just look at Haman, he got upset about the smallest little thing. He had all of this going for him, and what did he get upset about? Someone didn't stand up or bow as I went by. But he had everything else in place. Yet we'll go in churches and people will complain about the color of the walls, the color of the carpet. Oop, the lighting's not bad. The sound system is not quite as good as it should be. I don't like the music. You hear any of that before? That divides churches, and then as we drive around our local communities, what do we see? We see buildings closed, worship not taking place. As Jonathan said, compromise is taking place now, because what are they trying to do? They're trying to fill the pews based on compromise. Oh, I'm sorry, that didn't please you. I will never bring.
For the absolutely amazing sermon, basically on heaven and hell. Numerous comments were brought to myself and several other people there that we can't be having people come in, preach on hell and heaven because it upsets certain people. So could we please not have any more sermons on hell? And I was mortified. I'll be honest with you, a little indignant.
Yeah.
And said to this certain person, well, it doesn't matter what I said, but it is what it is. But the fact is that we've got churches right now that don't want to hear it. They want to come in and they want to have their ears, they want to feel good, they want to have it all inclusive, and they want to have a whoop-de-doo, and let's have a rock star, and let's all feel wonderful about this. Yeah. But as far as hell goes, we can't be talking about that. As far as anything about that stuff, I don't want to hear it.
There was a mega church on the western part of the state where the pastor had come out and basically said there was no hell. Yeah. Mega church, thousands of members, and had been the pastor for a number of years, and all of a sudden this whole doctrinal change took place, and he got away. Basically, he wrote a book that there was no hell.
Yeah, and also there was another lady that did something like that and said that Christian has got the same doctrine as
No hell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the two could be the same as Christ.
Yeah. Agree with that?
But this last
Raise your hand on that one, okay. All right.